It's finally here. The JA-37 Viggen has been added to War Thunder. Let's take a look. To start off, the Saab Viggen is actually two different planes. The JA-37 Interceptor with a secondary ground attack capability, and the AJ-37 ground attack jet with secondary fighter capabilities. What we have in War Thunder is the JA-37C, which is an upgraded model of the Interceptor version. The Viggen entered service in the 1970s with the Swedish Air Force, and despite some marketing efforts, no foreign sales really ever materialized. The AJ-37 ground attack version actually came first, and it wasn't until a few years later that the JA-37 fighter version came into service. It served in some roles into the mid-2000s and was for many years Sweden's primary combat aircraft. It features a unique compound delta canard configuration, but unlike some modern jets, the canards are not all moving. They have a flap on them, which is actually there to help landing performance rather than air combat maneuvering. Among its other unique features are a thrust reverser for the engine and full bogey landing gear. In fact, the Viggen was the first jet in the world to include both a thrust reverser and an afterburner. The Viggen tops out a little bit over Mach 2 in a clean configuration at altitude, and has no trouble punching through Mach 1 down on the deck with a full weapons load. Currently, there are only 2 or 3 other jets in the game that you can't catch in a flat-out low-level chase, even if it might take you a while to catch them. However, one of the biggest highlights of the Viggen is its weapons system. First, the PS-46 multi-mode radar system is really one of the best in the game. And out in the real world, the Viggen was the first combat jet ever with a fully digital weapon and avionics system without any analog components. Its radar has a pulse Doppler mode and an air combat boresight mode, along with range presets of 10, 30, 100, and 300 kilometers on the scope. It may not sound like much, but being able to go down to 10 kilometers on the scope is actually a pretty big deal in some War Thunder matches, given the small size of the maps we have in the game right now. I can't even imagine the 300 kilometer mode ever being used, but it's nice that it's there. The ACM boresight mode is very useful at this BR, since you're up against entire teams of phantoms dumping chaff every 5 seconds, and switching to boresight helps lock up individual targets amongst the background. If this is your first plane with an ACM radar mode, you're going to notice how useful it is pretty quick. The pulse Doppler mode helps against ground clutter and is almost essential below 3,000 meters. As a fun tidbit, the Viggen was the only aircraft the United States admits was ever able to achieve a radar lock on the SR-71 spy plane. The Russians say the MiG-31 was able to lock up the Blackbird, but the United States actually admits that the Saab Viggen was able to do so on a semi-routine basis, since the flight path of the SR-71 was well known to the Swedes, and they knew exactly where to look for it. In addition to the excellent radar set, the Viggen has a ballistics computer CCIP for both its guns and the unguided rocket pods it can take. Speaking of weapons, the JA-37C gets a pretty healthy selection of weapon loadouts. You only get the RB-24s to start, which are not the best weapon at top tier, but you can quickly upgrade to the RB-24J, which are far more credible weapons. The RB-24 and RB-24J are both the same things you had on the Draken, so you should be familiar with them by this point. You can also take some unguided rocket pods, but no bombs. The rocket pods are okay. If you take a full load, you can do some respectable damage to strategic bombing targets. Keep that in the back of your mind if you're having trouble, spading this plane off of air kills. And the gun has insane performance. The Viggen doesn't get any tracer rounds, but its gun is really something special. I don't know why, but I had an easier time getting gun kills in the Viggen than in any other plane in Jet RB. It's easy to get sucked into missile thunder, but don't forget your trigger finger up close. The real star of the show, however, is the RB-71 semi-active radar missile. This is the Swedish version of the British Skyflash missile, which is itself a heavily modified version of the AIM-7 Sparrow. It has better performance at low altitudes than most other semi-active radar missiles, and on paper it can outturn the earlier RB-24. The addition of the RB-71 to the Swedish lineup is a bit of a paradigm shift. Up to this point, Swedish jets only had access to IR heat seekers, so now that you can carry some radar missiles, it's easy to fall into some bad habits. For example, there can be a strong desire to hold your radar lock as you're waiting for the missile to hit, even as other fighters are shooting at you or slotting in behind you. It's also pretty easy to get tunnel vision as you're trying to lock up a target, and fail to notice his buddies vectoring in on you, and getting yourself shot down as a result. The RB-71 is supposed to be a good dogfight-capable weapon, but out in practice, I didn't have a lot of luck using it in close. Getting and holding a radar lock in a turn fight is just too much of a chore, and switching to the heat seekers up close ended up being more practical. Still, the RB-71 is a genuinely good missile with solid range and good maneuvering performance. I got some hits with it that actually surprised me a bit, including a couple of hits after my radar lock had seemed to fall off in the last moments of an attack. You've probably noticed in the footage that I've gotten a fair number of kills with this weapon from a BVR radar lock. The combination of the Viggen's crazy good radar system and the RB-71's range make this possible, and I had pretty good luck detecting and locking up targets at beyond visual range, even if they had to close to within visual range by the time the missile actually hit them. In air combat, the Viggen is in a unique position. It reminds me a bit of the Mirage 3 in that it can hang in turn fights pretty well, but it can also bleed off speed faster than you think in some turns. I got energy trapped flying the Viggen more than I expected to, and it took a dozen missions or so to get used to its handling. Once you figure out its performance, you can pull some absolutely insane turns off and get the jump on people, but you might not be able to do it more than once or twice in any individual engagement. The Viggen has countermeasures, but only a medium amount of them, so similar to some of the Russian jets, you have to exercise a little bit of discipline and only dump flares and chaff when you need them. If you're in the habit of randomly popping countermeasures every now and then when you're not in combat, just in case, it might not be, a decent thing to do in the Viggen, and it'll probably serve you well to ditch that habit. Taking the Viggen out in missions is quite fun, and you've got a number of options. You do have those rocket pods if you want to attack ground targets, but generally you're going to be hunting other fighters. The Pulse Doppler radar mode lets you stay low to the ground without losing much radar performance, and you can use your RB-71 missiles at low altitude most of the time. Try to get good at switching between the IR and radar missiles, and make sure you've got a convenient keybind for that, because as I mentioned before, after you get sucked into the turn fight, you're going to want those RB-24Js. Landing performance is actually pretty solid, even when the plane is damaged. There's no drag chute, so using the thrust reverser is going to be important. Set a keybind for it. It takes a little while to get used to the idea of cranking full afterburner to slow down, so, don't forget to kill the throttle once you've actually slowed down, or you'll start to back up. You also have to be careful that if you're out of fuel, obviously, you won't be able to use the thrust reverser, so keep that in the back of your mind. Graphically, the Viggen is, in my opinion anyway, one of the best additions to War Thunder in a very long time. The 3D model is superbly detailed, and the skins for the aircraft are great to look at. I splurged the 200 GEs and got the solid gray skin, which almost lets me act like I'm flying a Gripen. Almost. The new sound updates in the current patch are equally amazing, and the sound of the Viggen's cannon going off is particularly satisfying. You're also going to notice that the engine sounds are significantly redone, and aircraft flying near you are going to really knock your socks off. The cockpit is beautiful, with bright and useful displays, great visibility, and even an active map. The heads-up display is genuinely useful if you're flying the internal view. You're going to have no trouble at all using the VR headset inside of the Viggen's cockpit. To close things out, the JA-37C has an outstanding weapon system with missiles that are very competitive at top tier. It can turn incredibly well and keep pace with almost anything else in the sky, and it has one of the best radar sets available in the entire game. Honestly, the only downside I found with the Viggen is that it's a little easy to get overconfident when flying in it, or to get tunnel visioned on beyond visual range radar locks. The final verdict on the Saab Viggen is that this thing is the meta, and if you've gotten far enough up the Swedish tree, you should research this plane as soon as possible. As always, thanks for watching.